the hidden truth, how a messed up childhood shapes your life, and how to break free. Imagine this. You're 7 years old. You walk into a room and the air shifts. You don't know why, but suddenly you feel small. Not physically, existentially. You feel like your very being is somehow an inconvenience, a burden. You haven't done anything wrong, but your presence feels like a problem. And that feeling, that silence, that tension, it doesn't stay in that room. It follows you through your entire life. And here's the terrifying part. Most of us don't even realize how much of who we are was shaped by those invisible moments. The quiet neglect, the words that were never said, the love that had conditions, the safety that never came. This video is not just about psychology. It's about the philosophy of self, a deep inquiry into how we become who we are and how we can become something new. You see, a messed up childhood doesn't always look like trauma in the movies. It's not always abuse or screaming. Sometimes it's the absence of something vital in you, the absence of emotional attunement, the absence of feeling seen, the absence of being allowed to exist without earning your place. And when you grow up in that absence, you don't just adapt, you become it. You build your personality like armor. You learn to anticipate moods before they shift. You learn to people please, to disappear, to perform, and eventually you forget that you were ever anything else. You call it just who I am. But what if it's not? What if most of what you call your personality is actually a survival strategy?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Let's pause and ask a question most people never ask themselves. Who would I be if I had grown up in unconditional love? Really think about that. Strip away the guilt, the fear, the hypervigilance. Who would remain? This is the beginning of philosophical awakening. Because childhood isn't just where we start, it's where we're silently programmed. And unless we examine those early scripts, we end up living lives we didn't choose. We become adults who confuse anxiety for intuition, who mistake control for love, who fear vulnerability because we associate it with danger. And all of that is happening below the surface quietly, automatically running the show. Now, you might be wondering, isn't this just psychology? Why bring philosophy into this? Because psychology tells us what happens. But philosophy asks why it matters. It forces us to confront the deeper existential implications. Like this, if I never chose the core assumptions I carry about the world, can I really call myself free? Freedom, real freedom, isn't just the ability to do what you want. It's the power to question the very wants you have. And if your deepest desires were shaped by a childhood of emotional scarcity, if your need to succeed, or be liked, or stay invisible was a response to pain, then how can you say your life is your own? This is the hidden truth. We are not born blank slates, but we are born open, wide open. And in those early years, we absorb everything like gospel. Not because we're foolish, but because we're designed to survive. If love is withheld when we cry, we learn not to cry. If presence is given when we perform, we perform. If anger is punished, we suppress it. And over time, this becomes our identity. But it's not identity, it's adaptation. Have you ever noticed how some people are drawn to chaos? Or how others can't seem to rest, even when everything is okay? That's not random. That's home, not in the comforting sense, but in the familiar sense. If chaos was your normal, then peace feels foreign. If conditional love was your baseline, then unconditional love feels suspicious. And this is where the heartbreak comes in. We end up sabotaging the very things we long for because they don't match the emotional blueprint we were handed. Philosopher Simone Weil once said, "To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul." And here's the tragedy. Many of us were never given roots, we were given roles. The caretaker, the achiever, the scapegoat, and the peacemaker. We internalized these roles as our worth. And now, as adults, we still play them at work, in relationships, in our minds. We perform, hoping someone will finally say, "You're enough." But deep down, we don't believe it. Because the voice we hear isn't the world's, it's the echo of childhood, still whispering, "You're only safe if you're useful." Let me ask you a disturbing question. What part of yourself did you have to kill in order to survive your childhood? Was it your anger, your joy, your creativity, your neediness? This question isn't meant to wound, it's meant to awaken. Because the parts we exiled to survive are often the very parts we need to come alive. And this brings us to a philosophical crossroads. If we were shaped by what we lacked, then healing isn't just about adding new tools, it's about remembering who we were before the world told us who to be. Think about this. If you strip away the conditioning, the fear, the coping, what remains? That's your essence. That's the part of you that wasn't born in pain, but buried by it. And here's the kicker. Healing is less about becoming someone new and more about unlearning who you were told to be. It's about reclaiming what was yours before you had to earn everything. Your worth, your voice, your softness. Now let's get real. Breaking free isn't easy. Because the mind doesn't like unfamiliarity even when it's good for us. That's why healing can feel worse before it feels better. You'll start setting boundaries and feel guilty. You'll rest and feel lazy. You'll receive love and feel suspicious. That's not failure, it's the nervous system recalibrating. It's your inner world learning a new language, one it was never taught, but always deserved. We often think of trauma as what happened to us, but trauma is also what didn't happen. The hug that never came, the apology that was never spoken, the safety that was never offered. And when we grow up in emotional starvation, we learn to feed ourselves in strange ways through overachievement, perfectionism, self-erasure. But no amount of external success can fill the internal void of not being seen. So what do? First, we name it. Because what we don't name, we can't change. Ask yourself, what beliefs about myself and the world did I inherit, not choose? Curiosity. When you feel unworthy, ask, whose voice is this? Is it mine or was it planted? Third, we remember. We remember that healing is a return, not a reinvention. A return to the truth that your worth was never up for debate, that your sensitivity is not a flaw, that your need for care is not weakness, that your existence is not a burden. And finally, we rebuild. Slowly, deliberately. We create relationships where love isn't earned. We practice rest without guilt. We speak even when our voice shakes. Because every time we do, we're not just healing ourselves, we're breaking generational chains. Let me leave you with this. What if your pain is not just personal, but philosophical? What if your suffering is not just a wound, but a question? A question that asks, what kind of world do we want to create? One that raises children to survive, or one that raises them to live? Because ultimately your healing is not just for you. It's for the world you touch, the love you give, the cycles you break, the children you may raise, the strangers you may inspire. Every act of healing is a philosophical rebellion, a refusal to let the past dictate the future. So, yes, a messed up childhood can shape your life. But it doesn't have to define it. You are not doomed to repeat what shaped you. You are not bound by the silence, the neglect, the fear. You are capable of becoming someone your childhood self would look at and say, "You did it. You got us out." The philosophy of rebirth, how to reclaim the self they tried to erase. There's something hauntingly beautiful about a person who decides to rebuild themselves not because they were broken, but because they were buried. Buried under expectations, under roles they never chose, under the distortions of love that came with conditions, silence, or manipulation. And when we talk about reclaiming the self, we're not just talking about self-help or motivation, we're entering the realm of philosophy, of metaphysics, of identity. Because the self isn't just a label, a name, or a history, it's a process, a becoming. The self is not static. It's fluid, dynamic, recursive. It's that strange paradox of being both created and creating. And when we look at our childhoods, especially the painful ones, we begin to see something chillingly consistent across time and space. That the first thing a wounded environment strips from a child is not their strength, but their sovereignty. It tells them who they are before they have a chance to ask. It answers their questions before they learn how to form them. And the tragedy is, most of us accept these early answers as eternal truths. I'm not lovable unless I'm useful. My anger is dangerous. My needs are too much. I'm only safe when I'm invisible. These are not facts, they're philosophical imprints carved into the psyche at an age when questioning wasn't an option. And yet we continue to live by them as though they were gospel. But here's the radical, world-shaking truth. You are allowed to question the truths that were planted in you before you could speak. In fact, it is your moral responsibility to do so. Because if you don't, you will unknowingly become the perpetrator of the very wounds that shaped you. Let's go deeper. When philosophers talk about the self, they often fall into two camps: the essentialists, who believe there's a core you that exists no matter what, and the existentialists, who believe the self is a project, something you construct through choices. But what if both are right? What if you are born with a seed, your essence, but that seed can only grow if the soil is safe enough? And if it's not, then you adapt, you bend towards survival, and that bending becomes your identity. You learn to read faces instead of reading your own emotions. You learn to anticipate chaos instead of cultivating your own peace. You become what the environment demands, not what your soul desires. And over time, you forget the seed even existed. But it's still there, waiting. And the great philosophical task of adulthood, the real task, beneath the goals and habits and checklists, is to return to that seed and ask, what was I meant to become? This is where the concept of rebirth becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a philosophical necessity. Because if your first self was shaped without your consent, if it was built from fear, silence, or neglect, then choosing to rebuild it consciously is not just healing. It's justice. It's the reclamation of the agency you were denied. And let's be honest, this isn't a clean, linear process. It's brutal. It's disorienting. Because to be reborn, you have to let parts of you die. The people pleaser, the overachiever, the perfectionist, the avoidant. These parts aren't evil, they were protectors. They kept you alive, but they were never meant to lead. They were never meant to be who you are. And so, you grieve them, you thank them, and then you begin again. But how? How do you rebuild a self when you've never seen a blueprint? When your past is full of contradictions, love laced with fear, care mixed with control, affection followed by abandonment, how do you know what's real and what's manipulation? The answer is both philosophical and practical. You begin by watching yourself, not judging, watching. You pay attention to the moments you shrink, the moments you overextend, the moments you betray your own boundaries to keep the peace. But these are not random. They are echoes, ghosts of a survival strategy that once saved you, but now suffocates you. And when you notice them, you don't shame yourself. You get curious. You ask, whose voice is this? Who taught me that love feels like this? Who convinced me that safety is the same as silence? This kind of inquiry is not easy. It requires what the ancient Greeks called parrhesia, fearless speech, but not just outwardly, internally. It demands radical honesty with yourself. Because here's the truth, you cannot heal what you're still protecting. And many of us protect our past not because it was good, but because admitting the truth would shatter the illusion that we were ever safe. But you must shatter it, because on the other side isn't just loss, it's freedom. The freedom to say, yes, I was wounded. Yes, I adapted, but I am not my wounds. I am not my adaptations. I am the one who chooses what comes next. Let me ask you this. What would your life look like if you only made decisions from love, not fear? Not the love you learned to perform. Not the fear disguised as love, but real love. The kind that says, I am enough, even when I'm flawed. I am worthy, even when I'm messy. I am whole, even when I'm healing. This is the rebirth. Not a new name, or a new job, or a new identity, but the return to a self that was always there, buried under layers of protection. And when that self begins to rise, you'll feel it. Not as a grand epiphany, but in small moments. The morning you don't judge yourself for needing rest. The conversation where you say what you really feel. And the relationship where you stop trying to fix yourself to be loved. These are not just milestones, they are revolutions. And here's the deepest philosophical insight of all. You are not responsible for what shaped you, but you are responsible for what you do with that shape now. That's what makes us human. We don't get to choose our origins, but we get to choose our trajectory. And every choice you make to unlearn, to choose differently, but to love yourself more fiercely than you were ever loved by others, that is an act of defiance against the pain that tried to define you. So ask yourself right now, what am I still carrying that no longer belongs to me? Whose shame, whose fear, whose silence? And then ask, what would it look like to set it down? You may not know the answer yet. That's okay. The act of asking is already a step toward liberation. Because philosophical rebirth doesn't require you to have it all figured out. It only requires you to be willing to begin again with eyes open, heart soft, and mind ready to question everything you once assumed was true.